Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range 2023. This is a Rootin' Tootin' BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan to celebrate westerns, novels, short stories, maybe even movies and TV shows, all throughout the month of June. And I am back after a horrifying delay. I did not make a video yesterday. Less said about it, the better. But it prevented me from checking you in with what I'm doing for June on the Range. But I've continued to read. Every night when I make up my reading pile for the night, I throw on a Western. And recently, I wasn't really sure what direction I was going to go in for that, and Hamilton Thompson suggested that I read an Elmer Kelton Western. And Elmer Kelton was a prolific and much honored Western author, and I read a book of his last year for June on the Range, The Buffalo Hunters, I think it was called. And I really liked it. It was much, much better than I thought it would be, and also much, much better than it needed to be to get the job done for a 35-cent paperback 50 years ago. And at the time when I made that video, at the time when I read Elmer Kelton last year, I just said, well, I'm definitely going to read more of this author. And I didn't for the rest of June on the Range, and I didn't after that. I stopped reading Westerns after June on the Range. I would collect them still. When I found little ratty paperbacks, I would bring them home, put them in a pile. But in my mind, I just told myself, don't read them. You'll get to these all on June on the Range. So I never actually did go back and read any other Elmer Kelton, even though he's one of the authors that I like most from June on the Range last year. So I took that advice, and I just spun the wheel on the ebooks that I have, and I picked this, Way of the Coyote by Elmer Kelton, and started reading it, was pulled in right away. Just right away. The book opens with a man named Rusty Shannon, he's young, he's just 30, but he looks older than that, he seems older than that, and he has even in the opening pages, a remarkably laid-back, decent air about him. And he is caring for a little boy, a 10-year-old boy, named Andy Pickard, although he doesn't look like his name. He looks like a Comanche boy. Long braided hair, the nut brown exterior from the sun and exposure, rides a horse that way, thinks that way, talks that way. And the book just opens with these two making their way in the Badlands, and I think in Colorado, and being followed by a band of Indians, and they don't know the intent of that band of Indians, but their feelings towards them are deeply conflicted. Because as the novel opens, Rusty Shannon is taking little Andy away from the Comanche where he has apparently spent his whole life. That, I think, is him. That's supposed to be him on the cover. Little Andy. I think not little anymore, but we'll get to that. And Andy isn't sure that he wants to go. It's the only home he's ever known. But they're not. Rusty isn't abducting him. There's a parental relationship already starting to form there. It's just that, given his own, Andy would probably not go away from these people, even though, as the narrative and also Rusty quickly inform us, the Comanche, a lot of them want Andy dead because he's killed someone. He's killed a Comanche. As the events of their flight are sketched in very quickly, but very competently, it comes out that Andy killed his man in order to save Rusty's life. He didn't do it just out of homicidal whim, but nevertheless he has to flee because he's not sure if they will, the Comanche will kill him if they get him back. Some of them definitely want him dead, and that's the tension that opens this book, is that they're worried that they're being pursued by a war band. Turns out that's not true. Or Kiowa that are pursuing them, and it's just a question of a tense. They have to explain themselves. That's all, and move on. But it's a very good way to open a novel. It's a very lean, tense scene. And since it involves not a band of desperados, but rather a band of First Nation peoples, it necessitates that the narrative explain a little about Andy's past. So I know those of you who know your Elmer Kelton, some of you have been recommending this author to me. This is going to strike you as a little bit weird, maybe a little bit pathetic, but I did not know until I was well into this book that this is a direct sequel to an earlier book. I did not know that. I always say on this channel that really that's the author's lookout. It's the author's job to make sure that I don't feel like I am missing something. And although this book starts, I would guess, literally a minute after the scene that ends the book that comes before it, I never felt that way. In fact, just the opposite. I got well into the book before I even realized I was reading a sequel. That is this sort of thing really, really well done. Elmer Kelton assumes nothing about whether or not I need to know anything about his characters in order to care about them. He makes me care about them anyway. Even though, at the same time, he is giving you a what happened next direct sequel to the book that came before this, which I think was probably called Badger Boy. I'm not sure if that is true. I think I remember an Elmer Kelton novel called Badger Boy, and it turns out in this book that that was what the Comanche referred to little Andy as. They referred to him as Badger Boy when they took him in. They kidnapped him and killed his parents. And the same thing happened to Rusty Shannon's parents. Rusty Shannon is a lot luckier than Andy in some ways. He has fully assimilated into white Western settler society, and unluckier in some ways. Andy was rescued right away from the Comanche, whereas Rusty was rescued but doesn't even know his name. His name was cobbled together from other people, whereas Andy's provenance, so to speak, is well known, but he's thoroughly acclimated to being a Comanche and isn't sure that he will acclimate at all. He isn't sure that he can go back into white society, into Western society. And Rusty Shannon isn't sure he can either. And neither are any of the people that they meet. Once they leave that tense encounter with the Kiowa, they start encountering settlers, including a settler farm where that is their destination. Very, very well-drawn, sympathetic settler family. That are perfectly willing to take Andy in and teach him his ABCs and teach him how to dress like a white man and teach him that this is his home, that he wouldn't be comfortable with the Comanche and he wouldn't be safe with them either since he's killed one of their own. He would never be sure that they weren't going to kill him. There's a lot of that kind of black and white dichotomies drawn between white society and First Nation society. And there's not a whole lot of moralizing going on, even though the white society is systematically dispossessing the First Nations society. And there isn't any moral condescension at all. The characters in Elmer Kelton's novel might routinely talk about savages. Some of them might talk that way. But we are never given that impression by Kelton himself. By Kelton himself, we're given the impression of two societies that fundamentally do not understand each other. But not that one is superior to the other. And that was really refreshing. I don't know when this book was written, but had to have been 40 years ago, and at least. And that was really refreshing. That this is really an alien adoption story rather than a Manifest Destiny story, which would have been really tough to take. The Western novels that I have read for June on the Range that end up just nakedly espousing triumphal, Manifest Destiny crap, they are hard to take. Even when they're well done, they're hard to take. There's none of that here at all. Even though you'd think this would be right at ground zero of how you would tell such a thing. Because Andy Pickard is caught between those two worlds and isn't at all sure which he prefers. But Rusty Shannon is wise beyond his years. He's laid back, kind, moral, brave. He's a wonderful figure, a wonderful unassuming figure. And he is just estimating practicalities. He is not talking about how one society is better than another. He's saying only this is the only one that's going to work for you. You go back to that other one. Not only will some of the people among the Comanche hunt you because of what you did, but also the Comanche themselves are being hunted. Rusty never actually comes out and says better to be on the winning side, but he wants to try his best to domesticate Andy Pickard, to smooth out of him what is called by Rusty Shannon and by a whole bunch of other people his coyote ways. That's the nature of the title, is that can you change his nature? Can you make him civilized? And the book, it introduces, our characters fetch up at that settler homestead. And right after them come the villains of the piece, who are, again, refreshingly not the Comanche. They are the Oldham brothers. The Oldham brothers are horrible. They are real hissable villains. They're just a rotten group. And they have nothing but ill will for Rusty. One of them tried to kill Rusty in, I guess, a previous novel. There are earlier books in this series that I guess I need to go back and read. I only feel that way from interest. I don't feel that way from FOMO or from need at all. This is a completely successful novel on its own, even though it's lodged in a series of novels about the same characters. A remarkable, quiet, unassuming, but remarkable testament to Elmer Kelton's skill as a writer. Something that I noticed in The Buffalo Hunters when I read it last year, but boy, to have it demonstrated like this is no easy thing. There are plenty of really seasoned authors who could not pull this off. I'm going to go back and read those books. I don't know if I'll do it for June on the Range 2023. I'm curious to at least read Badger Boy, the book called Badger Boy, which I assume is about Andy Pickard's life with the Comanche. I'd be curious to read that, and maybe even to read Rusty Shannon's own past. But here, when they fetch up at that settler home, the Oldham brothers are right behind them. And there's a wonderful tense scene that really clues us into what they're like, but without any sententious narration. Elmer Kelton is not holding your hand. He's not rubbing your nose in anything. You get the clear sense of who's who and where they stand just from dialogue and interaction, which is wonderful. And after that, the narrative jumps forward years. And the next time we meet Rusty and Andy is a teenager. Still not assimilated. Still being routinely, viciously referred to by everyone around him as that Injun. That telling Rusty Shannon, no, that Injun that you have with you, that coyote that you're raising. Rusty is not angry. He is not resentful. He is not the type to take any of that wrong. He's very easygoing. But he's done pretty good for himself in the world, and also by Andy. He's done pretty good. But then, the plot, the past is never at rest in an Elmer Kelton novel. Obviously, that I now know that is true. Having a grand number of 2 under my belt, the past is never at rest here. Andy's deeds, his past with the Comanche, is rapidly coming back to haunt him, and so is Rusty Shannon's past with the Oldham brothers. And there are 2. Those 2 things are creeping up on our main characters, and Elmer Kelton gives us a climax for one that's terrific at the end of the book, then a climax for the other that's terrific at the end of the book, and then somehow manages to give us a third climax that is both combined at the end of the book. And there is a very satisfying ending. It's bittersweet, but it's very satisfying for this book as a book on its own, not as part of a chapter in an ongoing series of books. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Now, you would think, since I love this, since this is the second time I've read this author, I love both of them, you'd think I would just go back to him for June on the Range. But June on the Range is running out of time. We have a week left, less than that. And there's so much that I want to get done. Repeating an author at this, I did once already for June on the Range 2023. Repeating an author at this stage, all my instincts are against it. I want to encounter as much as possible. I know that I like Elmer Kelton. I know that I do. I might like him enough to read him even in the off season, even when it's not June on the Range. But I think for tonight, I will pick someone completely different. Something completely different. We shall see. This, an amazing thumbs up. On every level, there were so many ways this book could have failed. It could have been racist. In any direction, it could have been racist. It could have been simplistic. And the only way it's simplistic is the Oldham brothers, and that is a very satisfying kind of simplistic storytelling. To have such thoroughgoing villains is pretty satisfying. And it could also have failed structurally. It could have made me feel like I was coming into the 3rd or 4th book in the series, and it didn't at all. So, a total success for June on the Range. I've had a few of those this month. Hoping for one tonight. We shall see. I'm leaving Elmer Kelton behind. He is, and now in my mind, his credit in the Bank of Steve could not be higher. He's a guaranteed surefire thing. If he can do it here, he can do it anywhere. But I'm going to leave behind a guaranteed surefire thing and try something new for tonight. So, barring any unforeseen complications, I'll report back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.